Welcome to California Highways Route by Route. This podcast explores everything about the numbered highways in California, from Route 1 along the coast to US 395 along the Sierras, from Route 8 in the south to Route 139 in the north.
Brought to you by the California Highways webpage and Gribble Nation.
I'm Daniel Fagan. I do the California Highways webpage at cahighways.org.
I'm Tom Fear. I'm one of four admins on GribbleNation.org. Typically, I am the one writing about California in the southwest portion of the United States.
This is episode 2.08, Route 1, Marin and ... covering Route 1 through Marin to Redwood Country.
So far this season, we've been exploring California highways route by route, with Route 1 that we've discussed. The first federal road between Cumberland, Maryland, and the Ohio River, which is now US Route 40. The exploration of what Route 1 is in other states. The first state highway, the Lake Tahoe Wagon Road, which became US Route 50. The first legislative route, LRN 1, now US 101 from San Francisco to Crescent City. Slide Route 1, now Route 1, north of Gaviota, to US 101 near Fortuna. We saw that the 1964 state highway renumbering lengthened Route 1 with the addition of former sign Route 3, former US 101A, LRN 60 from San Juan Capistrano to Ventura. We then discussed the history of Route 1, working from the southern end from Dana Point in Orange County through all the counties up the coast, through and including the Golden Gate Bridge. For each, we discussed the history within the various cities, the plans for freeway routings, names used for the highway, plans and projects along the highway. In the last episode, we took a little digression to explore the Golden Gate Bridge. We talked about how it is US 101, yet not in the state highway system, the history of the bridge, how tolling works on the bridge, a number of projects ongoing on the structure. We received the comment that we may have erred in one area. So to be clear, tolling on the bridge is in one direction only, southbound, into the city of San Francisco. To avoid tolls, arrange your route so you traverse the Golden Gate Bridge northbound into Marin County. We are exploring a future special episode with a special guest to talk specifically about how tolling and fast track works in California. As a reminder, our discussions build upon the background we built in the first season of the podcast, where we discussed the history of the system, which serves to explain the eras of state highways and what we mean when we talk about legislative route numbers. The numbering approach to state highways, which explains how the route numbers were chosen and why, the names of the state highways, and how they were chosen, the organizations involved in the state highway system. If you want to catch up on any past episode, we encourage you to go to our Spotify for Podcasters home at anchor.fm/CA Route by Route, or our forever home at caroutebyroute.org, and listen to the back episodes.
In this episode, we continue our exploration of Route 1, going in post-mile order from south to north. Our focus today is on the portion north of the Golden Gate Bridge, from where Route 1 leaves US 101 in Marin County up to the southern edge of the Redwood Forest in Mendocino County. As always, we'll cover interesting history along the route, proposals for freeways, the stories behind some of the names on the route, interesting projects proposed for the route. This season we'll have 10 episodes on Route 1 and 2 on Route 2. The next episode will cover Route 1 through the Redwood Forest, Mendocino County, and is the penultimate episode on Route 1. The last episode will be on the Lost Coast portion in Mendocino and Humboldt County. And you'll probably be wondering, gee, they took 5 or 6 episodes to get all the way up to San Francisco, and then all of the Northern California stuff is basically in 2 episodes. And that's because there aren't as many little cities along the route in Northern California as there were in the segment south to San Francisco, and you'll see that as we go through this episode. As a reminder, Route 1, after 1964, has multiple segments. Segment A, which is Route 5 south of San Juan Capistrano to Route 101 near El Rio, except for the portion of Route 1 relinquished in Dana Point, Newport Beach, Santa Monica, and Oxnard. And there is authorization to relinquish in Los Angeles south of Santa Monica, that segment of Lincoln Boulevard, and at one time in Torrance. Segment B is from Route 101 at Emmawood State Beach, 1.3 miles north of Route 33, to Route 101, 2.8 miles south of the Ventura-Santa Barbara County line at the Mobile Pier undercrossing. Segment C, from Route 101 near Las Cruces to Route 101 in Pismo Beach via the vicinity of Lompoc, Vandenberg Space Force Base, and Guadalupe, with authorization to relinquish within Pismo Beach. Segment D, from Route 101 to San Luis Obispo to Route 80 south of San Francisco, along the coast via Cambria, San Simeon, and Santa Cruz. Segment E, Route 280 near the south boundary of the city and county of San Francisco to Route 101 near the approach to the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. We then have a gap at the Golden Gate Bridge. And then Segment F from Route 101 near the southerly end of the Marin Peninsula to Route 101 near Leggett via the coast route through Jenner and Westport. This episode is focusing on that last segment between Marin and the Mendocino County line.
Recall, Segment A, Oxnard, San Juan Capistrano was US 101A, Sign Route 3, and Legislative Route 60. Segment B, along the Ventura Beaches, was a former segment of US 101 since bypassed. LRN 2. Segment 2, Las Cruces to Pismo Beach. This is part of the original Sign Route 1. Segment C, Las Cruces to Pismo Beach. This is part of the original Sign Route 1. LRN 56 with some portions near Orcutt as LRN 2. Segment D in Slow, San Luis Obispo to San Francisco, the original Sign Route 1 and LRN 56. Segment E in San Francisco, the original Sign Route 1, LRN 56, but at times LRN 225. Segment F, Marin to Leggett, the original Sign Route 1 and LRN 56.
So let's look at the legislative history of LRN 56. The segment between San Simeon and Carmel is the oldest segment of this route. In 1919, the route from San Simeon to Carmel was added to the state highway system. In 1921, the segment from San Simeon southeast to Cambria was added. In 1931, it was extended further south to San Luis Obispo in a connection with Legislative Route 2, US 101, and some routing in Cambria was removed. In 1933, more extensions were added. A segment from Legislative Route 2 near Las Cruces via Lompoc and Guadalupe to Legislative Route 2 near Pismo. A segment from LRN 56 near Carmel to Santa Cruz, a segment from Santa Cruz to San Francisco via the coast, the state highway near the southerly end of the Marin Peninsula to the Marin-Sonoma County line via the coast route, a segment from the Russian River near Jenner to Westport, and a segment from Ferndale to Legislative Route 1, US 101 again, near Fernbridge. In 1935, this was all codified as Legislative Route 56. There were a number of subsequent minor changes to the legislative route. In 1943, there were adjustments south of San Francisco, which we talked about 2 episodes ago. In 1951, Legislative Route 56 was extended southward to the Marin-Sonoma County line and northward to US 101 near Leggett. In 1955, the definition of the last segment was reworded to add a connection to US 101. State highway near the southerly end of the Marin Peninsula to Legislative Route 1 near Fernbridge via the coast route through Jenner, Westport, and Ferndale, including a lateral connection with Legislative Route 1 near Leggett Valley. And as we'll see in 2 episodes, that lateral connection is now what is Route 1 as they gave up on trying to build to the Lost Coast. In 1957, they deleted the reference to Carmel, saying via Carmel. And in 1959, they changed it to via the vicinity of Lompoc and Guadalupe so they could build the bypass. And all of these modifications, they basically did an accept of track changes, and the resulting definition became Route 1 in 1964.
So the historical routings, the segment of Route 1 is more picturesque and doesn't have any major cities, and not that there are many minor ones either. We'll discuss a few communities: Sausalito and Marin, Muir Beach and Stinson Beach, Point Reyes, Bodega Bay, Jenner, and Fort Ross. The routing has also generally been mostly static since constructed.
Well, let's start off with Sausalito and Marin. In 1869, Marin County approved a 12-mile stage road from Sausalito to the ocean and along the shore north. The state allocated $14,000 for this. This established the route of present-day Route 1. The North Pacific Railroad was established in 1875 to haul wood from the redwood forests above the Russian River. Its route ran north from Sausalito, angling west through San Anselmo, Fairfax, to the ocean, and thence north to the Russian River. Route 1 follows much of this railroad's original route, and this is very common in the state highway system, that the state highway ended up following a railroad route. You'll see this again. I know Tom will tell you this, both when we hit US 101 and US 99, you'll see this with US 395 down near Riverside. The segment that's now 215 goes right along the railroad line. And there are just so many routes that the route is basically along the railroad. In 1954, the California Highway Commission adopted a mile-long segment of Route 1 between Manzanita and west of Dolan's Corner in Marin County. The route lies along portions of the existing highway near Manzanita, which is where Route 1 splits off of US 101. Remember we talked about those communities that you don't use the name of that much anymore. Manzanita is one of those. And Dolan's Corner. But it eliminated the southerly loop to the Coyote Creek Bridge and was slightly shorter. It also provided for improved connections to the Redwood Highway at Manzanita, integrated with the construction of the new Richardson's Bay Bridge and approaches. The article that announced that adoption noted that it would be some time before the routing would be constructed, but adopting it would allow the state to acquire right-of-way that had been offered at no cost and to utilize fill material from the Golden Gate Bridge approach construction on the Waldo grade. Additionally, because of structural deterioration, it was unnecessary to replace the original Coyote Creek Bridge with a new structure on the same site. It was planned that that new structure would carry replacement traffic until the adopted route was constructed. However, very often they make plans and they don't come to fruition. Based on the maps of 2023, it appears that only the US 101 Route 1 interchange portion of that new routing was ever constructed.
Moving on to Muir Beach, Stinson Beach, Bolinas Bay, and Lima. The founding of Stinson Beach dates to 1866 when Nathan H. Stinson bought property at the present site of the community bearing his name. By 1870, a stage road had been built from Sausalito to the site of Stinson's property, which was originally known as Willow Camp. This road is shown as the Bolinas and Sausalito County Road on the 1892 Tamalpais Land and Water Company map and was largely later incorporated into Legislative Route 56 in 1933. The road from Bolinas to Olema was first surveyed by the county in 1871. According to the Bolinas Museum Facebook page, the corridor along Bolinas Bay has always been flood-prone. The Marin County Journal carried a boastful story in 1875 which detailed the new highway which had been constructed along the Bolinas Lagoon. Said highway was reported to be immune to tidal flooding. Spoiler, it is not. Never was. This same road was described as being heavily damaged in 1878 with 3 bridges lost between Bolinas and Olema. This road was rebuilt again in 1921 as an all-weather road, but again suffered damage during floods in 1926. The 1921 road would be later incorporated into LRN 56 in 1933.
As we're recording this, we're in the middle of the atmospheric river storms, and I'm wondering how that road is doing right now.
I could tell you how it went in 2017 when we had a very large storm during the winter. It was fun driving a Chevy Sonic through that road. It was completely flooded, and I had to get all the way over to the right of the northbound lane to barely make it through.
But they never really solved the flooding problem.
No, they have not.
Moving on to Point Reyes Station. Point Reyes Station was plotted as a siding of the North Pacific Coast Railroad in 1875, which was originally known as Olema Station. The Point Reyes Station post office opened in 1882 and was changed briefly to Marin in 1891. The community's name reverted back to Point Reyes Station at some point later in 1891. The railroad was originally built as a narrow gauge line, but was converted south of Point Reyes Station to standard gauge in 1920. The railroad continued to operate a line to Point Reyes Station until the 1930s. The alignment of Route 1 northbound via Mesa Road, A Street, and 4th Street appears to have never changed since it was constructed. Further, the alignment of Route 1 through the Tomales Bay communities and Tomales between Point Reyes Station and Valley Ford has also remained static since the adoption of the legislative route.
Valley Ford, Bodega, and Bodega Bay. When LRN 56 was adopted in 1933, there was not a state-owned alignment between Valley Ford and Jenner. The interim routing took Route 1 from Valley Ford to Bodega Bay via Bodega along Freestone Valley Ford Road and Bodega Highway. By 1955, there was a new plan alignment of Route 1/LRN 56 providing a direct inland routing between Valley Ford and Jenner. On July 1st, 1957, Route 1 between Valley Ford and Jenner via Bodega Bay became part of LRN 56, having been upgraded via Federal Aid Secondary. This is what the parentheses FAS stands for, if you ever wonder what Federal Aid Secondaries and Federal Aid Primaries are. FAS 777. FAS 777 had been under construction since September of 1951 and included a brand new 8.9-mile road directly linking Valley Ford Road to Bodega Bay.
I think the whole FAS, FAP, which is primary, FAU, which is urban, and FAI, which is interstate, designations aren't used anymore, if I remember correctly.
I don't believe they are. At least they're not posted like they used to be. There's kind of digressing to the sign collecting hobby. Those actual little tiny signs that said FAS or FAP are usually pretty desirable among sign collectors. They tend to be embossed and have enamel paint.
Yeah, people know Interstate 305 simply because there have been things referencing it as FAI 305. Never in any signage, just on paper, but they mistakenly believe, it should be signed as Interstate 305. And no, it was just a funding mechanism. That's all these things to note is funding mechanisms. Now, we continue on with Jenner, and I'll let Tom go on.
In 1868, Lou Miller, a stage line owner, took the Sonoma County Board of Supervisors on a tour of the Sonoma Coast frontier and convinced them to build a road in place of the rough Pomo Pioneers Trail. 4 years later, there was a semblance of road along the North Sonoma Coast, but it took 12.5 hours to go from Jenner to Gualala.
I would think it's Gualala.
I'm actually not sure.
Yeah, that's my guess.
In October 1926, a quote-unquote fine road opened from Bodega Bay to the ferry at the Russian River, following the route made by the Russians in 1811. In 1931, the Russian River Bridge opened.
This brings us to Fort Ross. Until approximately 1972, Route 1 ran through the center of the compound built by the Russians. A lot of people don't realize, yes, the Russians owned land in California. Fort Ross State Historic Park is one of the oldest in the California State Park system, having been established in 1906. The original Russian settlement, built in 1809, is known as I'm thinking about how to pronounce this, Rumai-Antsev?
I think that's about as best as we're going to get.
Yeah, was located in what is now Bodega Bay. In 1812, Ivan Kuskov of the Russian-American Company set out from Alaska to the site of the Kashaya Pomo village of the Matini to establish a colony. Kuskov's expedition included 80 Alaskan natives and 25 Russians that would soon construct homes in addition to a stockade. Kuskov's colony was organized to establish a footing for hunters, an outpost for trade with the Spanish and wheat harvesting. On August 30th, 1812, Fort Ross was formally declared, Ross being a reference to Imperial Russia. Through the 1820s, Fort Ross was expanded upon as it became a more established settlement. In 1841, the Russian-American Company was bought out by John Sutter of Sutter's Mill. Fort Ross changed hands numerous times during the 19th century before being purchased by the California Historic Landmarks Commission in 1903.
Freeway plans and relinquishments. In 1949, the Department of Highways proposed a new 6-lane freeway along Sausalito's waterfront. Residents reacted with horror and organized opposition. Imagine why. In 1962, another proposal would have replaced Route 1 along the ocean and transformed western Marin.
So essentially, there are really no freeways along this segment, I don't think, anywhere north of the Golden Gate.
No. If I recall correctly, the closest planned freeway routing that was even close was what was planned as Route 17 towards the vicinity of Point Reyes Station.
The Point Reyes Freeway?
Yes.
Which I don't think was ever built.
No, it wasn't. Sir Francis Drake Boulevard is more or less the general corridor that proposed freeway would have took.
However, there have been a number of projects here. I'll let Tom talk about the first one.
In April 2022, it was reported that a proposed project along US 101 would elevate a portion of the southbound lane and off-ramp at the Marin City exit, construct a 700-foot flood wall between the highway and the stormwater pond, install pumping mechanisms that increase the flow from the pond into Richardson Bay. The goal is to ease flooding into southern Marin. The project also includes an effort to raise Route 1 north of the Manzanita Commuter Lot, which is closed routinely due to flooding. An automatic tide gate would be installed at the lot and drainage would be reconstructed. The Mill Valley Sausalito multi-use path would also be raised by about 3 feet. The projects have a rough estimate of $75 million to $100 million. They are in draft and likely will require an environmental engineer review, which is expected to take 1 or 2 years to complete.
Now, the big project in the area is a result of climate change. And you saw, we were talking about flooding near Manzanita. This is all an area that's going to be impacted by climate change. We're talking right now, though, about Stinson Beach. And in August 2016, the CTC approved $1.1 million in funding to repair the roadway there at 2.2 miles north of the Panoramic Highway. During a March 2016 storm event, a washout began along the roadway slope adjacent to the Bolinas Lagoon, which is part of a national marine sanctuary. Later wave action that following May caused the slope washout to expand and totally undermine the southbound lane. By October 2017, it was reported that Caltrans planned to reopen this storm-damaged segment if the weather cooperated. However, the record rains that winter caused significant problems on the highway, and Caltrans officials said there were 17 storm-related work sites in Marin, most of those on Route 1. The work had an estimated cost of $75 million. Segments reopened in Muir Beach in May 2017 after being closed since January after parts of the road washed away and down a hillside. A San Rafael-based company got the contract to rebuild those two sections of the highways in Muir Beach. At one of the spots, the roadway washed down and slid down an embankment, its painted lines still visible. The repairs required construction of a retaining wall that was supported by 50-foot-long steel piles. A series of shafts were drilled into the ground along the length of the wall, installed between the steel beams to create the wall, which was then backfilled with soil or aggregate. Then they repaved the road, and in all they needed 69 piles to support the roadway in two locations. To get to Stinson Beach while the segment was closed, drivers needed to use a detour on the Panoramic Highway, which extended the trip about 13 miles. You had to take the Panoramic Highway to Frank Valley, Lower Muir Wood Road, which caused problems as local and tourist traffic now mixed, slowing traffic. Making matters worse was the condition of Frank Valley Road, which itself was compromised because of previous slides. Parts of it were reduced to one lane for more than a decade. Further north in Sonoma, climate change continued to take a toll at Gleason Beach. In January 2015, there was a notice of preparation of an environmental impact report for a project south of Jenner that would realign a portion of Route 1 to move the roadway inland, eastward, away from the coast. That got approved for future consideration of funding in October 2016. The project would move Route 1 several hundred feet inland. The alternative selected would construct a 3,700-foot roadway with an approximately 900-foot bridge across Scotty Creek. In May 2019, it was reported that that stretch of roadway, which had long been at risk of failure from coastal erosion over 2 decades, had finally been abandoned. The cracked and sagging westernmost lane was shut down for good in mid-May 2019. This really triggered that emergency closure, and there was a single shared lane for all the travelers in that area. In November 2020, the California Coastal Commission unanimously granted Caltrans approval to realign Route 1, and by now the project was at $34 million, was shifting the roadway 400 feet inland and creating an 800-foot bridge over Scotty Creek. They broke ground in October 2021. It was figured to be a 3-year project. In March 2023, it was reported that the newly constructed stretch of Route 1 on the Sonoma coast had opened. Workers put a rush on final touches for the now $60.5 million job so they could get it open in advance of the storm and several more days of rain forecast after that. The new bridge at Scotty Creek, 850 feet long, is the largest human-made structure on the Sonoma coast. Have you driven that new section yet, Tom?
I barely missed it the last time we were out there. Went up there in the winter of 2021 is the last time I was around. I remember the repairs and the kind of the detours you're describing. It was pretty rough at the time.
Yeah.
There has also been bridge replacements such as the Longitis Creek Bridge. In May 2015, it was reported that the 86-year-old bridge that was leading to Point Reyes Station will be demolished and replaced in what will be at least a 7-year-long process involving public input, lengthy environmental review, and years of construction that will necessitate a temporary one-lane bridge across Longitis Creek. First real bridge to cross Longitis Creek at the site was built in 1875. Before then, ranchers ran cattle on the east side of Tomales Bay, but there was no way to Point Reyes Station. Ferries carried people across the water until a train station arrived and a town sprung up, spurring a wooden bridge and soon after Levee Road. In 1925, the county secured a $2.5 million bond to modernize Sir Francis Drake Boulevard, widening and realigning and paving the dirt road. because of the rise of automobiles and to help branch operations. The Green Bridge, a 152-foot steel truss bridge built in 1929, was the culmination of that project. Now, Caltrans says the steel bridge is deteriorating and vulnerable to seismic activity. In July 2018, it was reported that Caltrans has unveiled its final plans to tear down and replace the Green Bridge to ensure that the critical gateway to Point Reyes Station can withstand an earthquake. Of the 5 design alternatives and a no-build option Caltrans did consider, the agency has selected a 3-span concrete bridge design with the shorter of 2 proposed timelines as the preferred alternative. Project proceeded with various allocations, with the most recent being in October 2021 when the California Transportation Commission approved a request for an additional $1.275 million in capital outlay support, or COS, for the project. The additional funds were requested to complete the plan specifications and estimate project phase. After the 2019 North Bay wildfires, PG&E changed its power line easement requirements and impacted the project's footprints. PG&E changes now require 15-foot easements on either side of the overhead power lines to remove all trees and brush within this 30-foot wide easement. This requirement impacted the areas outside the original study limits and triggered an additional environmental studies and revalidation of the environmental document. The increase in the project's footprint required additional in-house consultant resources to evaluate temporary and permanent impacts that were not accounted for in the original budget. In addition to the resource impacts due to PG&E's requirements, the department expended additional resources to assist its legal division in the retrieval and review of documents from multiple sources, including HQ and district functional groups for the sequel lawsuit, which was not accounted for in the initial budget. In addition, due to the project's location, the project will require a California Coastal Commission clearance. The CACC will require a minimum of 2 public outreach meetings due to the environmental revalidation prior to submitting a permit application. This was not originally anticipated nor accounted for. Also, additional resources will be needed to update the project to the latest standards and specifications to achieve ready-to-list status by June 2023. As of October 2021, the project was 70% complete, with the remaining budget for the planning specification engineering phase is $168,000, which is insufficient to complete the phase. This is a good example of why projects are so expensive. They just balloon in cost every time they are shot back for things, and even seemingly minor things like this.
Right, and so you go back, and what happened here? You had the wildfires. These were caused by a sparking power line. So the PG&E changed how much space was required underneath the power lines to prevent fires. Well, this caused them to have to redo all of the study and redo all the plans, and this increased projects, which delayed things and added costs. And this is very common in the projects we see. Something with the utility causes some change, and this has ripple effects throughout the entire project. So moving on to namings, and guess what? Whereas you have segments of highways where, like, every 50 feet they name a segment of something, along Route 1 in this area, there have been no namings other than the traditional name of the Shoreline Highway, which it got in 1957. Nowhere from Marin to the Redwoods has some legislator said, I want to name this segment of scenic highway after somebody.
Ironically, it's a shame. It's a beautiful segment of highway.
I'm willing to bet the reason is a lot of these names are placed there near the communities where the person lived. Well, no one lived in these segments, so there's no reason to name them.
Yeah, which I think we'll get into more why that is during the Lost Coast episode, but a lot of it ties back to logging, so kind of a spoiler.
And with that, that's really what's in this segment.
So, next time on California Highways Route by Route, we will complete the current Route 1 with the discussion of the segment of Mendocino County from Gualala to Leggett.
For more information, visit the pages on Route 1 and Legislative Route 56 on cahighways.org, and I'll see if there's anything else worth linking in the area. Route 1 doesn't really intersect with a lot of other routes in this area. The batch of Gribble Nation blogs on the subject, Tom has a 2-part series on it that we'll link in, and I'll see what other links I can find and put on the show page.
As always, information on this episode is available on our website, caroutebyroute.org, where you can leave us comments on this episode. This episode is available on our anchor.fm home, anchor.fm/CA Route by Route. Join us as we continue to explore California highways route by route.
This episode was written by Daniel Fagan and Tom Peer, edited and produced by Daniel Fagan. Our opening theme is I Like to Be by the Seaside by John H. Glover Kind. As always, if you have an opening theme you think might be good for the show and is either in the public domain or you're willing to let us use for free, let me know. Episodes are recorded using freeconferencecall.com. This podcast is a product of California Highways at cahighways.org and Gribble Nation at gribblnation.org. And one thing that I always forget to say, if you're listening to this podcast, please remember to like it or favorite it or whatever you do to help spread the word about the podcast. I'd love to cross into the over 200 downloads for an episode. We're not there yet, so please tell your friends about this podcast. Let them know that when they hear the early episodes, the sound quality does get better. I've learned. And share the word about California Highways route by route. And with that, our usual closing discussion. Tom, what are your thoughts on this segment? The segment Up to the Redwoods.
So we actually, meaning me and Dan Murphy, talked about this on the Gribble Nation Roadcast Super Bowl pregame show. As one of the, what I thought and what he thought was one of the premier highways, scenic highways to see in the San Francisco Bay Area. And really, I think you could say that about the entire Shoreline Highway. Most people, when they think of Route 1, they either think of Malibu on the Pacific Coast Highway or they think of Big Sur along the Cabrillo Highway. But this segment's really, my opinion, really undervalued for its scenery. There's some people around the Bay Area that are probably familiar with Bodega Bay or in general because of the movie The Birds. But it's really just a pretty area of the state to visit. The climate's usually pretty stable because you don't have towering terrain like you do in Big Sur. So it's kind of one of my favorite places to go in the winter because it's just a really pleasant coastal drive for the most part. You got some pretty harrowing sections like Marin County coming up the Marin Peninsula. Just kind of give you that Big Sur feel, but for the most part, it's just kind of a pleasant, laid-back coastal drive.
And I will have to take your word for that because this is a segment I don't think I've ever driven. I've been on 101, but I don't think I've been on Route 1 in this area. So with that, we will end this episode. This is one of our shorter episodes, and you're probably asking, why such a short episode? Well, it didn't feel right to make all of the remainder of Route 1 a single episode after the details we went through on the others. So we will do one more episode on Route 1 and then an episode on former Route 1, what is now the Lost Coast. And then we will move on to Route 2. So we will talk to you next time on California Highways Route by Route.